Hello, welcome to this video where we will be reviewing the basics of genetics. So first we'll cover general genetics overall, and then we'll go into more detail later on. So first let's talk about what are genes. Genes are specific sections of DNA that encode proteins. They are found in our DNA, which is found inside our cells. The proteins that each gene has the instructions to make all have different jobs to help support our body's function. Genes can be changed, and that's not always a bad thing. If they are altered, they can create proteins that don't work or don't work as well as unchanged versions or have no impact on the protein's function at all. What are mutations? Mutations are changes to genes. Mutations can happen to entire parts of a chromosome or to a gene in particular. These changes are not always bad. Differences in genes can make us look different from one another or can cause illnesses. Mutations can cause certain genetic conditions or increase your chance of getting a particular condition later on. Common misconceptions when referring to mutations within a gene include that they are always bad or that they are always good. Neither is true. What are chromosomes? Chromosomes are condensed groups of DNA that are found in our cells. We typically have 46 chromosomes in 23 pairs. 2 pairs are known as autosomes, and 1 pair is called sex chromosomes, consisting of X and Y. On this slide, you'll see pictures of 2 karyotypes or pictures of our chromosomes. The top one is a typical female, and the bottom one is a typical male. The differences between sex chromosomes and autosomes. Autosomes consist of the 22 pairs of our chromosomes. They are numbered 1 through 22 and can control the inheritance of non-sex related genes. Everyone has autosomes 1 through 22, regardless of sex. Sex chromosomes. Sex chromosomes are X and Y, and they determine the sex of a person. XX is a female, XY is a male. These chromosomes have genes that are needed to develop sex organs and include genes for other traits as well.
Now we will move on to pedigrees. Pedigrees help genetic counselors visualize genetic inheritance patterns of genetic disorders. In almost all cases, a genetic counselor will ask you about your family history. They do this in order to create a visual representation, as otherwise known as a pedigree, during your genetic counseling session. This pedigree will help the genetic counselor visualize how genetic conditions are passed along through a family. Your parents are typically above you in the pedigree, your children are below you, and your siblings will be to the side. This allows the genetic counselor to see a full picture of your genetic, family, and social histories. Using the diagram to the right, we can see that squares represent males and circles represent females in this pedigree. The affected individuals are typically shaded in to represent the genetic condition that is being observed. Deceased individuals, we can see by the legend, is marked by a diagonal line. Pedigrees typically include a legend to show what is being described. Different genetic conditions are inherited in different ways. Not every genetic condition is inherited in the same way, and some are even non-inheritable, otherwise known as genetic conditions that are affecting an individual but cannot be passed on to their offspring due to a number of different reasons. There is other inheritance that is only passed down by people that are affected by a condition. And there is more modes of inheritance where not everyone that has the mutated gene or the affected condition being expressed has the genetic condition, and they can pass down the condition even though they're not affected by it. This is known as being a carrier of the genetic condition. There are 4 modes of inheritance that we will go over. The first is autosomal dominant, which is where the individual has the condition and passes it down, the expressive inheritance. And then there's autosomal recessive, X-linked, and Y-linked.
For the autosomal dominant mode of inheritance, you only need one copy of a gene to express this condition. And we inherit one version of a gene from each parent, a gene from mom and a gene from dad. And this gene can either be dominant or recessive, and each gene codes for a specific phenotype, or the way you present with the condition physically. If the dominant gene is present, the individual will have that phenotype, no matter if the recessive gene is present or not. And a good example of this is brown eye color. So if your mother has blue eyes and your father has brown eyes, the child will likely have brown eyes, or will have brown eyes, because it is an autosomal dominant trait. And if you look to the right at the pedigree, autosomal dominant traits are usually observed in every generation of a family. And autosomal recessive, so you need 2 copies of this gene. So in this case, there are no dominant genes. So in the absence of the dominant gene, the recessive gene phenotype will be produced. Another example is blue eye color. So if both your parents have blue eyes, then the child will have blue eyes as well. Because if you were to inherit only one recessive gene, like I mentioned previously, the brown eyes from dad and the blue eyes from mom, you would inherit one dominant trait, the brown eyes, which would be the phenotype of the offspring. All right, so X-linked conditions and genes are only located on the X chromosome. So we know that females have 2 X chromosomes and males have 1 X chromosome. And because of this, they're more likely to affect males because they only need to have the 1 present on the X chromosome. And it's important to note that X-linked conditions can be dominant or recessive. And a good example of an X-linked condition is color blindness, which affects many more men than it does women. And last, Y-linked. So this is limited to males only because only males have a Y chromosome. So if you see the pedigree on the right, only the squares are affected, which means that only males can be affected with these conditions.
In addition to these modes of inheritance, there are also additional considerations that genetic counselors need to make when looking at genetic conditions. One of which is known as penetrance, which is the variable expression of genes based on a number of factors within an individual. This means that a gene can be expressed subtly or severely. For example, something like height, where someone is short or tall. Another consideration is what is known as mosaicism. This is when someone has 2 genetically different sets of cells within their body. And each group of cells has different expression patterns that result in different phenotypes within a person's body. Mosaicism does not inherently cause disease or genetic condition. It is important to know genetics for genetic counseling and other healthcare services. If you're interested in learning more about genetics or genetic counseling, please check out our other videos within this module. Thank you so much.